Welcome to GPS, God's Prophetic Surprises, and we are studying together the book of Revelation, and I have with me a couple of colleagues of a younger generation, and wrestling with the impact that the book of Revelation has not just on my generation, but perhaps all the generations that we have available to us at this time. And to my far left we have
Shifra Fapuliai.
All right, and she is one of the pastors at the Campus Hill Seventh-day Adventist Church in Loma Linda. And I have
Pastor Philip Milosavljevic from Loma Linda University Church. I'm the young adult pastor there.
Okay, and I'm Jon Paulien, professor at the School of Religion and director of the Center for Understanding World Religions. It's good to be with all of you, and perhaps I would turn to the two of you and just say, what generations are you? Okay, I'm supposedly the boomer generation.
Oh, you're a boomer,
yeah,
are you?
Yeah, you know, because I was born after 1946.
Oh,
so
okay.
Part of the boomer generation. And where would you locate yourselves?
Yeah, I'm 32 right now, so I'm definitely in the millennial category.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for you, but that's all right.
Wow, this guy.
And?
I'm also a solid millennial.
Okay.
I think the next generation is Gen Z, and they're like many years younger than I am, at least, and I think also Pastor Philip, but they're closer to boomers.
So the Gen Z is a bit more like their grandparents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what they say.
But Gen Z, I think right now, is just getting to medical school, so around ages 22, 23, 24, something like that. And so in what ways do you look at boomers and say, they sure are weird?
Well, I mean, I don't know if I necessarily say that they're weird. I think more so there's things that I really admire. I find it interesting that Gen Z and boomers and how you describe that comparison, you know, they survived this modern economic downshift in 2008, 2009. So when their parents were coming about, I listened to a podcast on that. You heard it too, or maybe the same one, but it was talking about how they experienced that 2008, 2009 downshift, and so they understood spending as something that they need to kind of keep closer to themselves, be a lot more thoughtful, intentional, spend on only what they need and want, as opposed to just kind of blowing their money, as they say we have done in millennial generation, thoughtlessly, which I don't agree with. So I don't like these categories, to be honest with you. I feel like everyone should be taken within their context.
I think that's true. I think there is some washing across of generations, but there's no question that we have a generation gap, I think, within churches, for example.
Sure.
And certainly the younger generation looks at some things a bit differently.
Yeah.
And that's a reason that we're here together on this program to explore what some of those differences are. Now, I like the point you made, because my generation was raised by people who went through the Depression. So if you're American, you went through the Depression, then you would raise your kids to say, okay, watch every penny, et cetera. And I've kind of gotten known for following that advice occasionally.
Is that what your wife says to you?
Well, more other people, friends of mine, who just observed through the years. I've never seen anybody could squeeze a nickel like you, Jon. So, but I think I remember the words of James White, who is one of the founders of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and he had three things to say about money, which were interesting. First, he said, earn all you can. So, you know, maximize your ability to earn. Then save all you can. And then his third advice was give all you can.
Wow.
So that was his three pieces of advice. I think I was raised on that kind of stuff. But the Great Recession, as we sometimes call it, 2008, 2009, may have put into play some similar perspectives to what was there before.
And that's like in the United States, but even worldwide, so many countries were involved in the world wars, right? So you were raised by parents who went through the world wars in various countries. So I don't know how that relates to Gen Zs, because we haven't had a world war in our millennial time. But boomers are characterized worldwide.
I do think
through the world wars in many countries.
I do think the Great Recession affected the youngest generation and the idea we're concerned about safety.
Yeah.
Insecurity, that there's a sense of insecurity, that the financial situation isn't secure, the stock market isn't secure.
Yeah.
You know, the church is changing in ways that we don't understand. You know, there's a general sense of insecurity that may be there. And again, God can use that. When I'm feeling insecure, it makes me want to spend more time with Him. So,
that's good.
Yeah.
That's a good way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
I think the fact that many of us wonder, God, when are you coming? When is all this going to be over? I think that can lead us into an understanding that, hey, security is found in Jesus. Security is found in the timing that He sets when He's ready. But I will be with you. As Revelation talks about, the very first, chapter, I will be with you through those trials and tribulations. I'm going to be the God that's going to go through the fire with you, as Daniel's given us an example of. I'm going to be the God that's going to go through the lampstands. So regardless of the economic situations or political climate or church instability, we have a God who's with us. That's a cool thing.
Amen.
That's a
I
cool
like
thing.
how you named these different terrains, that God is willing to go through all these different places, because we're from different generations, right? We come from different upbringings in that sense. And when I'm thinking about how we read Revelation, how does one apply to their life? And each life is so different, and yet God goes with us in every different situation. I don't know.
Yeah,
Cool.
yeah.
So, Shifra suggests that we read Revelation.
Yeah.
So why don't we do that, Shifra? Why don't you pick up, because last time we got started on verses 1 and 2 of Revelation 11.
Okay.
And there's a few more things I think we want to say about that. So why don't we read those 2 verses again and get back into it.
All right, Revelation 11, verse 1 and 2. You can follow along in your Bible. I was given a reed like a measuring rod and was told, go and measure the temple of God and the altar and count the worshipers there. But exclude the outer court. Do not measure it, because it has been given to the Gentiles. They will trample on the holy city for 42 months.
All right. So you have here clearly imagery, it seems to me. And you have John. By the way, this is a continuation of chapter 10. We have a chapter division here, but John is being spoken to. He says, I was given a reed like a measuring rod and was told, go and measure the temple of God. All right? And that is continuing the action of the previous section when he ate the scroll and had the sour stomach and was told he has to prophesy again. So chapter 11 is unpacking chapter 10, verse 11, where John is told he must prophesy again to many nations, peoples, languages, and kings. So chapter 11 will help unpack what John was told in 10:11. It's a continuation of the same story. So one thing we notice here is temple language. And what does temple mean to you?
Couple things. Could mean a building, could mean a body,
Okay.
right?
How do
Temple
you
of the living God.
Okay, so you're connecting with the idea that there is the temple, the Holy Spirit has a temple in our bodies. Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
I mean, you think about the idea of temple, it is a specific place. It's not just an ethereal realm of the mind. This is talking about a real, legitimate place. He talks then in the end of verse 2, nations, people that are going to take over this temple. They're going to trample on it. So it's talking about a literal place where something is being done to it, some type of violence. The idea of trampling, something negative is happening to this temple.
In John's memory, did Gentiles ever trample on the temple?
He probably was around during the 70 AD occurrence that happened there, and then later on, I don't know if he was there around the second rebellion that occurred, But definitely he would have seen that 70 AD rebellion and saw the destruction of the temple. That would have been horrific. So that's a good point. I mean, he's bringing an allusion to that.
Well, the tradition, at least, what we know from the history, including material from outside the Bible, is that in around AD 66, Roman armies came to surround Jerusalem. And the Christians in Jerusalem remembered that Jesus had said, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, know that its destruction is at hand. And, you know, flee, don't stop to, you know, pick up this or that, just go. And interesting enough, for whatever reason, the Roman general had a change of mind. Perhaps he heard rumors of an attack coming from some other direction, but he pulled the armies away from Jerusalem. And during that time, the Christians in Jerusalem, remembering what Jesus said, all fled to a place called Perea, which was across the Jordan in what we call the nation of Jordan today. And it is assumed, without any direct evidence, that John would have been one of those who went with them to Perea. And then 15, 20 years later, that group, many of them went on to Ephesus to get away from further outfall of the destruction of Jerusalem. So the language here does echo something that happened right within John's experience. If John is writing around 95, this temple language would be especially meaningful to him, I think. So, what do we do with temple language? As you both talked about, for the New Testament, the temple, first of all, is Jesus. Jesus said, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up again. And people are saying, huh, you know, it took 46 years to build this thing. He's going to do it in 3 days? You know, that's ridiculous. Jesus and John explained, no, Jesus was talking about the temple of his body. So the temple, first of all, is Jesus. In another place, he said in Matthew, something greater than the temple is standing here. Well, for the Jews, nothing was greater than the temple except the Shekinah glory in the temple. It is the presence of God that makes a temple a temple.
Right.
But that means that God and the Shekinah glory, God's presence, is greater than the temple. And so Jesus is saying something greater than the temple is standing here. He's saying, I'm carrying the glory of God, the Shekinah. I am the temple. So for the New Testament writers, the temple is Jesus. But then they drew the conclusion that wherever Jesus goes must be a temple.
Okay.
If Jesus is the temple, then wherever Jesus goes is a temple. Is Jesus in heaven? Yeah, you see. So there must be a temple in heaven. Is Jesus with the church? Well, wherever 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am in the midst of them. So Jesus is in the church, so the church must be a temple. And does Jesus have a presence in our lives? And the answer would be yes. So an extended meaning of temple for the New Testament is in heaven and in the church and in the body. And temple language is used for all 3 within the New Testament.
Cool.
So
but here it was in reference to an actual place.
Well, that's the
that
question.
was described as being a place where that some destruction of some kind was done to. But what's interesting to me, though, it wasn't done to the whole thing. Is that what it's saying here? Leave, it says here in verse 2, but don't measure the court outside the temple. Leave that out, for that's given to the nations, because that's where they're going to trample the holy city. So, I mean, what do we know about the outside of the court of the temple?
Well, that's, of course, where the enemies first went in. The Romans first took the outer court, but then there were still people holding the temple itself and battling, you know, door to door, so to speak, through the temple. But clearly, this text is not talking about that. Because in verse 2, it says that they will trample it. They will trample the holy city for 42 months. Future. So John may be alluding to the destruction of Jerusalem in 70, but he's really referring to something in the future yet. This is not something that's happened in his experience. Exactly what is being described here. So the question is, which temple is this? Is it the temple in heaven? Is it the temple of the church? Or is it the temple of the body? And
when you say body, you mean the body of?
The human body.
Okay.
Yeah. So is John here, is this a metaphor for the battle that each of us goes through every day? And that doesn't seem, it seems a little far-fetched, doesn't it?
I don't think that...
Talk about Gentiles trampling and all kinds of stuff.
I mean, when we have this parallel to the 2012-60, that is in reference to a clue for us on to understand what temple this could be in reference to. So I don't think it could be pointing to anything else but what happened in terms of a apostasy from following Christ for a season in the Christian church, there for 1,260 years, using the time-date principle that we talked about in several episodes prior to.
Yeah.
So I think that gives us a clue as to which temple this is in reference to.
So you're suggesting maybe this temple is the church?
I think it has to be.
In 2 Thessalonians 2, I think I would agree with that. Does that really fit here?
Well, it says count the worshipers there at the temple and also to measure the altar, right? So it's hard for me to find parallels to a body, right, that has an altar and worshipers that you can count there. So just on that logic, it must be a building, some kind of edifice or place.
Well, the point is, if the building represents the church, then who are the worshipers?
Right. Yeah.
So that has led some, including myself, to say, nah, probably not the church here.
Okay.
If it's not the church, it's not the body, then it must be the heavenly sanctuary.
A place, yeah.
How can you say the Gentiles are trampling the heavenly sanctuary?
Yeah, that just doesn't make sense to me, John. You got to explain that one. You got to really explain that one. That I don't understand.
Okay.
And what is it that makes it the heavenly? Is it because of the holy city being trampled?
Well, let's go to Daniel 8.
Okay.
All right. And in Daniel 8, now don't misunderstand me. I'm not totally opposed to the idea this could be the church. It's just a bit odd to express it the way that it does.
Okay.
But if you go to Daniel 8, verses 9 to 12, it says, out of one of them came another horn, which started small, and this horn is an earthly power. An earthly power that's in opposition to God's people. As you're following, you have the Persians and the Greeks, you know, prior to this.
Right.
Then comes this little horn, which is connected somehow to the Greeks or what comes after. And it says, out of one of them came another horn, which started small but grew in power to the southeast and toward the beautiful land. That's geography, so it's earthly power. He grew until it reached the host of the heavens. And it threw down some of the starry host to the earth and trampled them. It set itself up as great as the prince of the host, took away the daily sacrifice from him, and the place of his sanctuary was brought low.
Okay.
So you have a heavenly sanctuary that's brought down by an earthly power.
This is incredible.
So what is going on here? Evidently, this is figurative language, that the heavenly sanctuary suffers when God's people are persecuted on earth. And the attack against the gospel or the attack against the people of God is perceived in God's mind as an attack against the government of God. So in the cosmic conflict kind of idea, I think the idea of this is the heavenly sanctuary comes through most clearly. And for Seventh-day Adventists, of course, this is the place where we originally saw a heavenly sanctuary, along with Hebrews, is our pioneers saw that something special was going to happen on this earth at the end of Daniel's time prophecies in the 19th century. And one of those things is the revealing of the heavenly sanctuary And as you remember, when we talked about Revelation 10, Hiram Edson, walking through a cornfield, has this picture. Oh, 2,300 days wasn't about Jesus' return. It was about shining up the heavenly sanctuary and bringing it into earthly view. So what happened in 1844 was attention was brought back to the heavenly sanctuary, and our pioneers saw that in this text. So seeing this as the heavenly sanctuary is seeing it the way that Adventist pioneers did.
And last two proofs, I guess. Just my skeptic is coming out.
Come on out.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, are you trying to prove this by the fact that you're looking at the word holy city here? Because point the connection between the parallels so I understand, and then also, how did you use Daniel? Because that's a common understanding that some people kind of look to and say, hey, how are you jumping between Revelation and Daniel like this? I mean, where's the connection? Where's that clear line to point, hey, let's go to Daniel because...
It's in verse 2.
Because it's in verse 2.
Yeah. What do you see in verse 2?
So you have the temple, okay?
Yeah.
You have the nations. You have the 42 months.
42 months.
Okay.
Yeah. Because in Daniel, chapter 7, also in chapter 8, it's a different time period, but in Daniel, you have this earthly power that does something to the heavenly sanctuary during a period of time on this earth.
Okay.
So you have illusions are determined by intersection of a number of factors.
Okay.
Okay. Now, this is not about winning an argument. Let's hold open the possibility that the church interpretation could either be correct or they might both be correct. As we go into the two witnesses, that comes back into play. But I did want to point out that when the Adventist pioneers felt that this was the heavenly sanctuary, that they had biblical grounds for doing so. And we'll keep open, keep that skepticism coming, because we're not skeptical about the Bible here, but what we are skeptical about is what we see in the Bible.
How we interpret it.
Yeah, there's a difference. My interpretations and your interpretations need always to be held with a certain level of skepticism. That's the scholarly side, okay? We can have strong convictions about what a text means for our own personal faith, but as we're seeking to persuade others, we need to be aware that we are very human and very fallible.
Well, I just wanted to say, thanks for that. I got excited about Daniel 8, 9 to 12 that we were reading because, I mean, what audacity for this horn to start small. I forgot about it in this context. You connect it. For this horn to grow, start small, grow bigger, and then reach the hosts of heavens, and to have this idea that the place of the sanctuary could be brought low, that it's as paradoxical as the Son of God dying, right? You don't think about the holy city being trampled on, right? So I'm waiting to see how this plays out in the witnesses too.
Well, here's the question. Going back to Daniel 8 in our minds as a thought experiment. At the end of 2,300 days, which Adventist pioneers understood as 1844, and there's a whole, raft of history and study that goes into that we can't cover here. But at the end of that 2,300 days, the sanctuary was to be cleansed.
Okay.
And they understood that to be the heavenly sanctuary. So the question is, now we got these three sanctuaries, heaven, church, and body. What's going to be cleansed here? See, the pioneers said it's the heavenly sanctuary that needs cleansing, and they brought out the idea that perhaps it's the sins that have been accumulated there that need a day of atonement in which the sanctuary gets cleansed.
Okay.
Those viewpoints have fortified many people through the years. As I go and look at them, I sometimes wonder if that was really what was going on there. And so I raised the question, what in the heavenly sanctuary would need to be cleansed? And I think this is compatible with what our pioneers saw, but it may extend it perhaps, and maybe your generation will find this more interesting than it has the other. And that's the idea of the character of God. there's doubts in the universe about whether God is what he says he is. And God raises a movement at the end of time that will shine a light again on his character and vindicate his character. But it's the second thing, also vindicating the character of his people. Because people up in heaven have got to be wondering, if these sinners come up here, is it going to ruin the neighborhood? And they get a chance in this period of cleansing of the sanctuary, they get a chance to look and see how God dealt with each one of us and whether or not we are safe to bring into the neighborhood. And they get a chance to look at that too. God gives them. In other words, God gives an open government. So go ahead, check me out. Check my decisions. Check how I've handled this. I'm willing to be examined and judged by you. Now bring it back. What in the church needs to be cleansed if the church is a temple? And one of those is false pictures of God. False doctrines like everlasting burning hell that make God look terrible. You see? Something else, though. How about governments, church governments that don't reflect the openness of God's government? Through the Middle Ages, we had a situation where the church became an absolute dictatorship that controlled the lives of a lot of people. And even recent popes have spoken to that and said, you know, this was not a good time. Okay, so we're not poking fun at anybody in particular. We're simply saying there are times in history when the church was a mess. And its government was the problem. It was not reflecting the character of God or the government of God, you see? And so cleansing the church from false doctrines and pictures of God and false ways of controlling people in the name of God. And what about the body? What needs to be cleansed there? I like to suggest that's where a health message comes in. At the end of time, encouraging people to cleanse their body temples of sin, and of you know, anything that would make them less able to follow faithfully at the end of time. So it seems to me this idea of the cleansing of the sanctuary could be a powerful message even for your generation.
I was going to say, this seems further relevant to our generation because I think it was Augustine who feared thinking that we could hurt God's feelings or that God even had feelings, I think. There's this idea. But the idea that the heavenly sanctuary is affected by earth's pain, that's relatable. That's relational.
The cosmic battle affects every one of us. So the Adventist pioneers came to these texts and they said, at the end of time, a people's going to rise up that will talk about the book of Daniel, the scroll that was there in chapter 8. Talk about the book of Revelation. You, John, must prophesy again. Talk about the gospel. Mystery of God will be finished. Talk about the heavenly sanctuary. And the Adventist pioneers looked at this and said, somebody needs to do this. Since we can see it, why don't we be the ones? So, if you are a Seventh-day Adventist or thinking about becoming a Seventh-day Adventist, there is a message in the Bible that is just for you and for anyone who wants to be ready for God's prophetic surprises at the end of time. Till next time, this is GPS.